Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here today. And actually, it's really interesting to be following a presentation from TEL, because when I was in China last month, I did exactly the same double. I spoke, then someone from TEL spoke. So obviously, there's a connection somewhere that is being part of my life. Okay, so language learning and AI, what should be done to ensure that teachers and learners benefits? Very much what I'm going to talk about. But I want to start a little bit by what is AI? Now, obviously, that's a very complex question, and I'm not going to spend a huge long time on it, but I did think it was important just to get the conversation going, help people think about what AI is. So yeah, the official definition is technology capable of actions and behaviors requiring intelligence when done by humans. And I think that's the important thing to remember, that this is all about trying to do things that humans do intelligently. And if we go back to the birth of modern artificial intelligence, which was a conference called the Dartmouth College Conference in 1956, that was very much about scientists getting together, trying to understand enough about human intelligence, including language learning, to be able to build machines that could automate the processes that the human mind goes through. So it's very much steeped in our understanding of human intelligence. And you'll realize as I go through this presentation why I think that's really important to remember. But it's not something for the future. It's here, it's now, it's impacting on all of our lives. Anybody who uses an e-passport gate or an online assistant like Siri or Alexa, and every time we search on Google, we are using AI. But I thought this headline from the New Scientist in April was particularly interesting. AI achieves its best ever mark on a set of English exam questions. And I thought that was interesting because traditionally we often think about AI as being good at STEM subjects. So it was very interesting to see that this was an English language exam. But I also think it's interesting that this is even a headline, because exams and tests are the kinds of things that AI loves, because it's the kinds of thing that you can learn for, which is what modern AI does, and then present your answers. So it's not surprising that AI is good at exams and tests, including those involving language, not just science, technology, engineering, maths. But why is the situation here now so important to us? So it's really because we have a perfect storm that's come about in the last 2 or 3 years where we have amazing amounts of computing power and memory at our fingertips. My mobile phone has got far more power and memory than the machines I used when I was studying artificial intelligence and computer science at university. When we were students and we wanted to run a program of any size, you had to do it overnight. I could do that in a split second on my phone now. So things have moved on, and we have this power and memory. We also have masses and masses of data. I mean, the presentation that you've just seen showed you teachers dealing with huge numbers of students learning online, and all of that is generating enormous amounts of data that are used to train the AI. But it's not just data that we actively offer as we interact with the technology. It's data that tracks us using cameras. It's data that tracks us as we search on Google. Huge amounts of data that can be used. And now we have these very sophisticated artificial intelligence algorithms that learn. And that's combination, that perfect storm, is really why in recent years AI has suddenly made great leaps forward. When I first started studying artificial intelligence and computer science, IBM had just built Deep Blue, which was the computer that beat world champion Garry Kasparov at the game of chess. And everybody was feeling very gung-ho about artificial intelligence because, after all, intelligent people play chess. Therefore, surely, if we have an AI system that can play chess and beat the world grandmaster, we must have cracked intelligence. Not really. Because, of course, things like seeing, which we took for granted, was incredibly much more complicated than learning to play chess. And it took us much, much longer to develop the kind of systems that now power our automatic passport gates and can do the facial recognition and identify objects. And they're still not perfect. And that's important because I think a lot of the time in AI, we underestimate how complex a lot of the things we take for granted in our human intelligence are. And we need to remember that. But it is really the perfect storm. And when we think about that chess game playing machine compared to AlphaGo that beat Lee Sedol at Go in that wonderful moment in AI history, they're very different types of AI. The first one doesn't learn. You have to write lots and lots of rules or other mechanisms for the computer to process information and make a decision. But it won't learn. Modern AI using machine learning learns, and that is what makes it so powerful, because it can get better and better and better at a certain subset of intelligent tasks. So that's the sort of basics. And as I've said, the perfect storm involves data. And so you find phrases like, data is the new oil. And it's certainly true that companies that are using lots of data for their AI are making a lot of money. But it's also true that data is crude in the same way that oil is crude. And we need to refine it to get value from it. And that's where I think all of you need far more voice in this. Because the value that we get from the data depends on how we process it. It also depends on the decisions that are made about what is the data that we need to collect. And when it comes to teaching and learning, educators should have a much greater voice in those decisions, because you understand much more about teaching and learning and how it happens than most of the people who build modern AI systems. So, key point here is AI is intelligent, it's amazing, but in a very specific sort of a way. Humans are intelligent in many, many ways, a rich variety. So it's just important to remember that they're not the same. And at the moment, all we have is domain-specific AI. A machine such as AlphaGo that can play the game of Go can't translate English to German or vice versa. A machine that can do translation can't play Go. There is much conversation about artificial general intelligence, but we are nowhere near that yet. So we certainly don't want humans and AI to be doing the same thing. We need to think in terms of complementarity. And that means that when we use AI in teaching, we need to think about, well, what are the things that the AI is good for, and what are the things that humans are much better at? And so I think there are really three routes to impact when it comes to education and AI. And we need educators to be thinking about all of these. And I'm really going to focus mainly on this one, but I'll say a little bit about these two as well. But they're not separate, they're interrelated. Because if we help people to understand more about AI, they'll be able to use it more effectively to help tackle some of the big educational challenges. And if we do that right, then we can also help people to understand why education might need to change, because we have this thing called AI. So they're certainly connected. But firstly, what can we do with AI to tackle some of the big educational challenges? And you've certainly seen an example preceding me. So first of all, what's the reality? What do we have here and now? Well, we have some very, very smart technology. In addition to the kind of approach that you've just seen happening in China, in online schools and after-school learning clubs, you have this kind of technology, which is built by a company called Alelo in the States, which are very, very effective teaching systems that use machine learning with a particular speciality in language learning. They do other subjects as well, but they have a particular speciality in language learning. Their founder speaks 9 languages, including Mandarin, and I think that's where the energy for language learning comes from. But what they do that's interesting and why it's worth thinking about a little differently is that they try to help people understand the cultural signifiers in a language, not just the semantics and the syntax. And so these are interesting products to look at, and they're certainly freely available now. And their English language tutor called N Skills is one that works online, so a student anywhere in the world can open up their browser and start using the N Skills training program, and that uses machine learning to increase the efficacy of the way that the system adapts to each individual learner. And it uses speech recognition so that the student can speak to the AI, and the AI, in the form of an animated agent, will speak back. And this is what they specialize in, these animated agents, which is interesting. But then you have a very different way of thinking about using AI in language learning. This is a company called Chatterbox, which actually helps to put together refugees who speak particular languages with people who want to learn those languages. So it's a very different way of using artificial intelligence. So it's a platform for connecting humans together. But it also uses some AI for regular practice, self-study, the way that it pairs the speaker, the refugee speaker, with the student who's learning. That uses some AI. And there's also some interesting ways in which they group people together using AI to try and help them learn more effectively. So that's a very different approach. This is another one. I'm trying to give you variety here to think about the ways in which AI might work for you. So this is one very much about trying to help learners become confident at speaking the language. So here we're using AI to analyze the speech clarity as the learner is speaking into their, in this instance, a mobile phone. And so trying to be very precise about improving speech. And this one I put in because I don't want you to run away with the idea that AI for language learning is only for adults or for teenagers or for school-age children. This is one for babies. Well, it's actually for babies' parents. This is a little product that sits, it's this one here, that sits in the room and tracks an infant's language production and some of their activities, and then provides feedback to parents about how they can better help their child to develop their language. And this one is really relevant to the lovely speech that Herbert gave about executive function, because this is also extremely important. And this is a really lovely use of AI, a little bit of AI. We're helping them to try and see how they might use some more AI. So this is a company called Cognition. And you know that task that we did where we had to clap when we saw a word that was N back? Okay, so one of the tests that you do when you sign up to Cognition is that very task. And so when you sign up to Cognition, you take a test that tests your executive function, your memory, the accuracy, your speed of response, very much in vein of what Herbert was talking about. And then you play this little game called Aquasnap. I bought this for my family for Christmas because I think it's really good. And you can use it at all ages. And just 5 minutes playing Aquasnap will help you develop those executive functions. And it's quite fun, and the AI is used in the background to try and tailor the way you play that game to whether you need to focus more on your memory or more on your speed of response or more on your executive functioning. So a really nice example of AI. So those are all things that are here now, freely available, not in a research lab, out there being used in the world. But what about the potential of AI? Because I think as educators, when we think about what we want and how we should plan for using AI, we need to think about the potential as well as what's here now, because things do develop very quickly. So remember I said data's the new oil, needs to be cleaned. It's what powers artificial intelligence. Well, it can also be what powers our increasing human intelligence. One thing I get very frustrated about when I hear people talk about AI, and particularly AI in education, is we kind of talk about how amazing the development of the technology is, which is true. But we often forget that we're pretty amazing as well. And we haven't stopped learning just because we've got AI, or we haven't if we're sensible. You know, our minds, our intelligence will go on developing. It's not a fixed point. And I think that's important to remember. So in terms of thinking about AI and human intelligence, I said we can collect data. And look, there's so many different ways in which we can collect data. And we can analyze it. But as we analyze it for an educational purpose, what we really need to do is to apply what we know about human learning to the way that we process these algorithms. We need them to be built in a way that uses what we've learned from the learning sciences about how people learn, about how people learn a language, from neuroscience, from psychology, from education, from all of the multidisciplines that make up the learning sciences, because we need them to power those algorithms, to power decisions about the data that's collected and the way that it's processed and used. And at the end, I'll come to how I think we might help educators to be much more involved in a world where most of the people developing AI don't know anything about teaching and learning. A few do, but many don't. And if we get it right, then we develop an intelligence infrastructure that helps us to understand from that data how our learners are progressing, if we're a learner, how we are progressing. Because we've built an infrastructure that is that masses of data powered by the memory and computing power that we have, and powered by algorithms that are built with an understanding of teaching and learning. And then these power all of our technologies, robots, normal screen-based technologies, mobile phones, virtual and augmented reality, but also they power this all-important human interaction, because our human teacher knows more about what's going on with our human learner. And of course, they can empower us as learners to be self-effective, to be good at learning because we understand ourselves better. And I think that's what we need for the future. And this isn't just for the able-bodied, intelligent exoskeletons. We already have glasses that can help many blind people see. Imagine them with increased intelligence in them. Embodied technologies, reading the mind, quite literally. It's amazing, the potential, and we need to think of it in those terms. Very briefly, educating people about AI. Really, we want people to understand AI. We want everyone in the world to understand enough about AI to use it effectively for them and to use it safely. We need a small minority of the population to understand enough about AI to build us the next AI systems. We don't need everybody to learn to code. We need people to understand what AI is, what it can do, and what it can't do. And we also need people to understand why we need to question its use and when we need to question its use, because if we get it wrong, we will lose people and they won't want to use AI because they'll be too anxious and too frightened. So we have to pay attention to this now. So I like to break it down into the three basic things that technology does. You have some input, you process it, and you produce something as a result. So at input stage, what's the data that's being collected? Who decided that was data that we should collect? There's no such thing as raw data. It doesn't exist. Somebody made a decision to collect it somewhere, and if they didn't, somebody made the decision that it might be useful. So what is the data? Has it been collected ethically? Is it being stored appropriately, privately? All of those questions around data. And then you think about, well, what's happening when it's being processed? There was lots of publicity recently about the Amazon recruitment bot because it only recruited males, because the data that it had been trained of was from successful applicants, and the majority of those happened to be male. Biased data set used for training. If our learners only learned a very small subset of a language, they would only learn that language. We have to be careful as we train our algorithms that we train them on representative data and that we process things in an ethical way. And then, of course, there's the output. What happens to that output? One of the things I'm concerned about is a little bit like this one here. There are a lot of what are called deepfakes out there. And we have to be wary that you could develop an AI tutoring system where you could have somebody who's a professor on the screen, but actually what they're saying isn't what they would say at all. But it's been so carefully designed and engineered that it looks just like them. So there are lots of ways that we need to be careful, and I've only scratched the surface, but I draw it to your attention because I think it's so important. So important that we founded the world's first and still only Institute for Ethical Artificial Intelligence and Education. Because there are loads of people looking at ethics and data and ethics and AI, but nobody was focusing specifically on education. And education has to be the most important thing in the world, because we want people to learn throughout their lives. And we'll never have regulation that will keep everybody safe, because we'll never be able to keep up to date with exactly where the technology is going. We can have good regulation, and we must, but we need people to understand enough to keep themselves safe as well. Now, this bit about changing education, and I'll take a sip of water as I prepare, because this is definitely the hardest piece of the puzzle. The fact that we have built AI that can ace exams and tests should be telling us something. It should be telling us that perhaps that's not what we want humans to be good at too. But of course, we still need humans to have the basics of understanding the building blocks of learning so that they can improve. So how could we change education? How must we change education? Because of what's affectionately referred to as the fourth industrial revolution. In other words, the changing world around us that means that many jobs are being automated or semi-automated. We really need to think about this very carefully, and different parts of the world are embracing this to a greater or a lesser extent, but everybody needs to start thinking about it. So if I'm a human and the world's changing around me, and I want to work out what it is that I need to be good at now in order to prosper, and if I'm a teacher and I want to work out what are the things that I need my students to be good at in order for them to prosper, then I think it is very heavily related actually to what Herbert was talking about with executive function. But of course it's much more than that. We certainly need people to have understanding of subject areas. We definitely need them to still understand the different subject areas that we teach in schools. But we also need them to understand something about that knowledge in a much more sophisticated way than they do at the moment. It's affectionately called epistemology, but nobody likes the word epistemology, so I call it meta-knowing. In other words, knowing what knowledge is, where it comes from, that it's relative, that there are actually very few facts, and that it changes over time. And we need to challenge things when we don't think they're genuine. We need people to understand how they can tell truth from fiction, what evidence really is, and when evidence is something that should make us believe something. So that's what that one's about. And then, of course, we need social intelligence. Most of the world's problems are so big that we need groups of people to solve them. And we need them to come from different sorts of expertise. So we need to do collaborative problem solving much, much more. And many employers are really looking for that. So if we need to do collaborative problem solving, we need people to have social intelligence. And then, of course, there are the ones on this right side, which are all about self-understanding, and that taps in a lot to what Herbert was talking about. AI is really smart, and machine learning has made huge differences, but machine learning does not understand itself, and that's a real problem. So machine learning may be able to reach a decision very, very quickly, processing huge amounts of information, but it won't be able to explain how that decision was made. Big problem in education, I think. How many people would trust a teacher who couldn't explain why they've decided that you as a student need to be told this thing, or need to be in this particular grade, or need to be doing this? So self-understanding is something AI really, really struggles with, but it's something we can be very good at. We're actually naturally not particularly good at it, but we can be very good. So we certainly need metacognition. Really need to understand what we do know, what we don't know. We need to know when our attention is moving away from where it needs to be and how we focus again. And we need emotional intelligence. If we're going to be doing all this collaborative problem solving, we really need to be able to understand our emotions, understanding other people's, but also to have that meta-understanding of the way our emotional intelligence is developing and the way other people's is too. And if I look at our current political situation in the UK, I think if only we had decision makers who had better emotional intelligence, better social intelligence, and could do collaborative problem solving better, we might be in a better place. But we don't. And then this one, contextual intelligence. We often forget that, but you know, the importance of the physical body to our brain. Interesting research out today, actually, looking at the connection between the gut and Parkinson's disease, for example. You know, the connection between the gut and brain functioning. We underestimate how our physical embodiment impacts on that intelligence. You know, I've never given a lecture in this theatre before, but I kind of know how it works. If I started doing some backflips over the chairs, you'd probably be quite surprised and think that's not the kind of thing that normally happens. I'd be surprised because I can't do backflips, but you know, there's a way of behaving, and we as humans can adapt to that very easily. AI is rubbish at this. So these are things that actually we can be really good at, but AI can't. And if we get them all right, this wonderful, accurate, perceived self-efficacy is what we end up with. And that's what will help us distinguish ourselves from the AI as we move forward. So It's not about separate intelligence, it's about all of those being woven together and being human intelligence. And AI can help us with this. Remember what I was saying about data and an intelligence infrastructure, all of this data that we can collect. If we get our algorithms designed by our learning science appropriately, then this can help us to develop all of those meta-intelligences. And that's how we need to progress. So these are my 3 actions. I focused much more on this one, and they're wrong way round now. I apologise. The one should be over there, but you get my drift. I've said less about this one, but it's a real challenge, and less about this one, which is very important. But they're all interconnected. How do we make this happen? Well, one example of how we make it happen is through partnerships. I think we need much more co-design by multi-stakeholder partners. And one of the things we do, and I can see, and had I known they were going to be here, I might have said more about them. One of my participants is in the audience, which I only spotted when I started talking. But we run a program at UCL, and I think this is a real example of how partnerships can help. So I just present it as an example. It's called Educate. It's built on the Golden Triangle, which is all about trying to bring together the people who develop the technology with the people who use the technology and the people who understand how you know if it works or not. So it's all about collecting evidence and helping people through research methods training, helping entrepreneurs to understand what it means to make a judgment about whether their product or service does actually do the educational thing they suggest that it does, and working with educators to understand their needs far more. So this is the Golden Triangle that the Educate program is built upon, and this is what I think we need to put at the centre of this cycle of activities if we're really going to get educators far more involved in the discussion. Because it's all about data and evidence and research, and so is AI. AI is all about data and processing it, often to produce evidence. And so if we get this right, then I think we can have the right kind of model where we can build this lovely virtuous circle because we do this. With respect to AI, we help educators and AI developers to work together. The AI developers understand more about teaching and learning as a result. The educators understand more about AI as a result and therefore can contribute to the design process more. And we have researchers such as ourselves helping to make those connections, helping to be the glue between those 2 different communities. And just as an example of one of the companies in the language learning space that's been through our program and are now using AI, they weren't using AI when they first came to us, we have Busuu. So language courses with the use of artificial intelligence. Again, a bit like the chatterbox, where you're getting practice with somebody, with a human, to practice your language skills. This is communities of native speakers being used. And I cannot get rid of this icon on the slide, so I'm sorry about that. Try and ignore it if you can. It's right in the way. I'll have to go back to them and ask them to produce another one. But they have a lot of lessons, a lot of different languages. It's personalised. One of the things AI is very good at is adapting to individual needs to produce personalised lessons. And then training that's very carefully targeted to where the person is in their learning journey, wherever that is. And importantly, providing feedback to the learners and to educators so that they can improve. I know, as a teacher, before I was an academic, I taught in schools and in further education colleges. And I taught very challenging groups. I taught adults with special needs, and I taught teenagers who were in not a particularly good school, and they were the stream that's not going to get the exam scores that they're trying to work out what to do with, and very, very challenging. And I know that day after day, I would come home thinking, oh, if only I knew more about what was going on for them, if I knew more about where they were stuck, if I knew what was bothering them, I could be so much more helpful. And that's what AI can give us if we get it right. It can give us that information that we don't have just from the moments of interaction we have with those students. And I think particularly for challenged students, that's very important, but it's important for everyone. So to summarize, AI is smart, but we are way, way smarter, and we need to remember the difference between human and artificial. We can tackle educational challenges. We need to change our education system to prioritize human intelligence, and we need to help people understand AI so that they can use it and keep themselves safe. And the way we do this is through partnerships. I think we should embrace AI. We should want it to help us, but we should be wise and careful and judicious in the way that we engage with it. It is important to differentiate. And I think what happens is that we build AI in our own image. We build it to do the things that we treasure. So hence why it's good at remembering lots of information, processing lots of information. And also that is what AI can do, given how it's designed and the components of data and power. But there's so much that we don't value about our own human intelligence that is very different. And personally, I believe won't ever be automated. There are lots of people who disagree with me on that, and we don't know yet. It's an empirical question, and we haven't built those systems yet. But yeah, and I think the example of chess, and then suddenly realising, oh, no, it's harder to see. There'll be lots of those coming along, I'm sure. But I'm glad it makes it less frightening. That's good.
It's kind of contradictory, because you say that we're building artificial intelligence to do what we treasure, when really or to do what we like doing. And it seems to me what we really should be using artificial intelligence for, like we use machines for, is for the stuff that we don't actually want to do.
Yes.
And we'd rather have some other entity.
No, I think it's not the things we like doing. I think you're right. I think we build it to do the things we don't necessarily want to do.
Okay.
But I think the danger there is that we've also built them to do the things we treasure. My point is really that I think we don't treasure the right things.
Okay.
So I think there are things about us that we don't treasure because they're hard to measure. Mm-hmm. You think, we treasure what we measure. And you can put that the other way around. We measure what we treasure.
Yeah.
So the point about the exam question is exams and tests are still a big part of most education systems. They are so AI friendly. That's what AI eats for breakfast, basically, that kind of thing. So we need to think of ourselves differently. But I think there is a danger in it's a very good point, Eric. There is a danger in offloading too much to AI, and then we dumb ourselves down, just at the moment when we should be making ourselves smarter. I think at the moment we're hooked on individual technologies, and that's not helpful. That's why that intelligence infrastructure is what I think we need to look towards. And that can empower all of those technologies, but more importantly, it can empower us as humans to be better teachers and learners. I am seeing in some countries in the world mass embracing of AI, and therefore I don't think it's going to be so long before you will see those scaled implementations. But you're right about it's still only going to be good at certain things, and it's still very narrow. And yeah, the singularity, which is the word used to describe artificial general intelligence, when we have machines who are intelligent, can do the range of things. It's at least a long way off, if not never. So we are a long way from that. But I think increasingly there is increasing evidence that the tutoring systems that are powered by AI can help students get up to speed in particular areas of the curriculum quickly and effectively. They are not teachers. They are not as good as human teachers. True. But they can do some of the basic work that then the teacher can build on. So they can be used in discrete ways. I was saying over here when I joined the discussion a bit that actually my biggest worry, apart from not getting educators' voice in this enough, and in a way the worries are connected, is that we will end up with poor kids getting fed through the AI platform. Maybe some bouncers in the room to make sure they don't misbehave. And the more privileged learners will get the lovely, rich human interactions with the AI used judiciously to support that process. So I have a worry. I think I share some of the worry that I'm hearing in your voice.
Yeah.
And we do need to be careful about that. But that's precisely why we need educators to be far more involved in decisions about how AI is designed for use in education and how decisions are made about its use. And so I think it's always about getting the right blend of the human and the artificial intelligence. Because what we need to be doing with these systems is helping them to make us smarter than we are now, not the opposite. So, yeah, you're right, we can do a lot of useful things with AI, but it's not all that education is just what I think we need to keep reminding ourselves. One of the things that I think would be particularly good to do with very young learners is helping them to understand what AI is. And you can do it with very young learners. I have conversations with my grandson who's 6. Sorry, this is anecdotal evidence, which as a scientist I shouldn't present, but I know other people do similar things. Where we talk about what is Alexa, why does Alexa say that? What's going on? What is artificial intelligence? And so I think, we can do that with young people as well as using it to help do that intelligent diagnostics, if you like, which is something AI is good at. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much.